According to Madeline Babcock's sister, Pat Foy, Babcock contacted her family for the last time at 4 p.m. on June 11, 1968, from her hometown of Los Angeles, California. Babcock called her mother from a payphone and said that she planned to have a friend drive her to her mother's residence the following day, which was located approximately 20 miles from Babcock's Venice apartment. Babcock never arrived at her mother's home and has not been seen again. At the time of her disappearance, Babcock was employed as a barmaid at Fred's Tavern and on an assembly line at a plastic glide factory, both in Santa Monica, California. Foy visited the bar when she failed to track down her sister within a few days. The owner of the bar said that Babcock did not report to work as scheduled during the first week of July 1968 and did not contact him. Foy and their mother stopped by Babcock's apartment on Flower Street in Venice later in the week. The landlord allowed them to go inside Babcock's residence, and they discovered all of her personal belongings had been moved out. The landlord was unaware of any activity in the apartment during the preceding days, and he did not realize Babcock had disappeared. Foy and their mother contacted the authorities in Venice by mid-July 1968 to report Babcock as a missing person. Law enforcement was apparently unconcerned about her disappearance and believed Babcock left of her own accord. Babcock's case has been filed with several missing persons agencies since that time. Currently, the Los Angeles Police Department is investigating. Her family says she was close to them, and it is uncharacteristic of her to leave without warning. According to Foy, Babcock was abused by one of her former husbands. She was twice married and divorced at the time of her disappearance and had 4 children. She did not finish high school. Her hobbies in 1968 included singing and playing the guitar. Babcock's family stated she was not close to them, and it wasn't unusual of her to be out of touch with them for long periods. She apparently had very few friends in the Venice area. Foy continues to search for her sister. Babcock's case remains unsolved. Carolyn Beeler was last seen in her hometown of Garden Grove, California, on August 23, 1979. That day, her car was discovered abandoned on the Garden Grove freeway, its lights flashing. Shortly afterward, she made a desperate phone call to her brother, Larry Fox, claiming she had been kidnapped and was being held for a $100,000 ransom. Larry Donald Smith, a mutual acquaintance of Beeler and Fox, soon became a central figure in the case. He admitted to picking up Beeler from the freeway and was subsequently charged, along with 2 accomplices, with threatening violence as part of the ransom scheme. Smith claimed that Beeler had willingly participated in the kidnapping and extortion, supposedly as retaliation for Fox's alleged theft of over $1 million from Smith and 2 men known only as Jack and Ray. Smith told authorities that he was coerced by Jack and Ray into participating in the plot. According to his account, after picking Beeler up from the freeway, he took her to a cabin near Lake Arrowhead on the evening of her disappearance. The next day, he brought her out on his boat, eventually traveling to Dana Point, California. There, Jack and Ray joined them on the boat. Smith said he was ordered to leave the vessel and remained on the dock while Jack, Ray, and Beeler took the boat out to sea. Approximately 30 to 45 minutes later, Jack and Ray returned to shore without Beeler. Smith was arrested and charged with Beeler's abduction and presumed murder shortly after she vanished. During the investigation, small bloodstains on Smith's shirt were found to match Beeler's blood type, consistent with samples taken from her clothing. Based on the evidence, authorities concluded that Smith had killed Beeler and disposed of her body in the Pacific Ocean. In 1980, Smith was convicted of Beeler's kidnapping and murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his conviction, Beeler's remains have never been recovered, leaving lingering questions about the exact circumstances of her death. Carolyn Beeler was born and raised in the Fontana, California area and graduated from Bloomington High School in 1972. She had recently gone through a divorce just a few months before her disappearance. Some records inaccurately list Los Angeles as the location of her disappearance, but Garden Grove remains the confirmed place she was last seen. Her case, while officially resolved through Smith's conviction, continues to haunt those who knew her. Pegye Beckler and her husband, Eric Christopher Beckler, rented an 18-foot powerboat on July 7, 1997, to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. They set out in the Pacific Ocean off Newport Beach, California, for what appeared to be a day of leisure. Later, Eric was found alone in the water, clinging to a bodyboard and screaming for help. Eric claimed that while Pegye was in the boat, he had been towed behind it on the bodyboard. He said he slipped under the water, and when he resurfaced, Pegye was gone. Eric suggested that she had been swept off the boat by a wave. When rescuers arrived, they found the boat nearby, still running and moving in circles. Despite an extensive search, Pegye's remains were never recovered, and she was presumed to have drowned. The couple, who had 3 children, seemed to have a stable relationship, but their marriage was far from perfect. Eric drank heavily and was frequently unfaithful. Police had been called to their home twice for domestic disputes, though no charges were filed in either incident. Together, the Becklers had founded Jerry Care Rehabilitation, a retirement services company, which brought them substantial wealth. However, by 1997, both had been fired from the company for alleged misconduct and misuse of funds, and they were under investigation for Medicare fraud. Their financial situation had become precarious. Notably, Eric had taken out a life insurance policy worth over $2 million on Pegye shortly before the ill-fated boat trip, though he was unable to collect on it after her disappearance. From the outset, investigators and those close to the Becklers suspected foul play. Despite these suspicions, Eric was not arrested until October 1999. By then, he had begun a relationship with an actress and bikini model, Tina New. Law enforcement contacted New, who agreed to wear a recording device during her interactions with Eric. Under the influence of alcohol and the drug ecstasy, Eric made incriminating statements to New, confessing to murdering Pegye. This recorded confession became a key piece of evidence in his trial. Prosecutors argued that Eric had killed Pegye by beating her to death with 2 35-pound dumbbells and then dumping her body into the ocean, weighted down by the dumbbells. When police searched the Beckler home, the dumbbells were missing. Eric's best friend testified that Eric had shared his plan to kill Pegye and dispose of her body in the ocean. The motive, according to prosecutors, was to claim the life insurance money. Eric maintained his innocence, even when confronted with the evidence. He insisted that Pegye had drowned in a tragic accident and that his confession to New had been fabricated in an attempt to impress her. However, the prosecution highlighted the inconsistencies in his story and the lack of any traces of Pegye's blood on the rented boat, despite Eric's detailed description of the alleged murder. Ultimately, Eric was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. His appeals have been denied, and he remains incarcerated. His supporters have set up a website proclaiming his innocence, suggesting that Pegye might still be alive and living in places such as Spain, Australia, or Morocco. Despite these claims, Pegye's remains have never been located. Donald Lee Baker was last seen on August 6, 1956, while accompanied by his friend, Brenda Jo Howell. The 2 children rode their bicycles to the San Gabriel Canyon area near Glendora Mountain Road, but they disappeared shortly after. A day later, Donald's jacket and Brenda's bicycle were discovered near Morris Dam, which was approximately a quarter of a mile south of where they were last seen. Donald's bicycle was found a month later, but despite extensive searches, neither of the children has been heard from again. At first, authorities believed that the children had run away from home, but over time, their perspective shifted. In 1970, Mac Ray Edwards, a convicted serial killer, pleaded guilty to the murders of 3 California children and was sentenced to death at his own request. Later, Edwards confessed to the murders of 3 additional children, including Donald Baker, Brenda Howell, and Roger Madison. Edwards directed investigators to a location where he claimed to have disposed of their bodies, but a thorough search of the area yielded no evidence or remains. Due to the lack of physical evidence, Edwards was never charged in connection with the disappearances of Donald, Brenda, or the others. Tragically, Edwards died by suicide while on death row in 1971. A photograph of Edwards is included in the case summary, as it was revealed that Brenda Howell was his sister-in-law and that Donald Baker was one of his neighbors. In addition to Donald and Brenda, 2 other children went missing from the San Gabriel Mountains area in the 1950s and 1960s, Bruce Creeman and Thomas Bowman. Authorities believe that Edwards was most likely responsible for their disappearances as well as the disappearances of Ramona Price and Karen Tompkins. His alleged victims ranged in age from 7 to 16 years old. At the time of his disappearance, Donald lived with his parents in the 5700 block of Rockdale Avenue in Azusa, California. The circumstances surrounding his case suggest foul play, which is why it has remained unsolved for so long. In 2007, Donald's case was reopened as authorities renewed their search for the bodies of Edwards' victims. Edwards had worked as a heavy equipment operator in the 1950s and 1960s, helping to construct many highways throughout California. Investigators now suspect that he may have buried the children's remains under these highways, prompting a renewed effort to search those areas. Donald's case is being investigated by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and anyone with information regarding the case is urged to contact them at 323-890-5500. The case remains open. Jonathan Bandabala was last seen on May 3, 2019, while en route to a soccer tournament in Oakland, California. He was driving a silver two-door 1998 Honda Accord with the California license plate number 7XBG925 at around 1:30 a.m. on May 4th. Multiple witnesses called the police to report a car parked in the westbound slow lane of the San Mateo Bridge. Several of the witnesses also mentioned seeing a person sitting or standing on the guardrail overlooking San Francisco Bay. California Highway Patrol units responded within 20 minutes, but by the time they arrived, there was no one in or around the vehicle. Jonathan Bandabala has never been heard from again. At first, the police did not search the Honda when they found it on the bridge. Instead, they had the car towed to a private lot. It wasn't until May 9th, 2 days after Bandabala's family reported him missing, that authorities realized the abandoned vehicle belonged to him. Investigators then conducted a search of the car and discovered Jonathan's duffel bags and passport inside. He had recently purchased the car but had not yet registered it, and in the glove compartment, they found ownership documents in his name. However, it wasn't until later in May that a forensic search of the vehicle was conducted. Further complications arose when the tow lot owner was told by authorities that Bandabala's family didn't want the Honda back. This was not the case. In fact, his family was trying to raise the money to retrieve the car, but by the time they contacted the tow lot owner, the car had already been sold. The police initially theorized that Bandabala may have jumped off the bridge in a suicide, but his family strongly disagreed with this assumption. They argued that Jonathan had been in good physical and mental health at the time of his disappearance and had no reason to take his own life. A search of the waters beneath the bridge yielded no sign of him. Additionally, since his disappearance, Bandabala has not used his cellular phone or accessed his bank accounts, which further adds to the mystery of his case. The circumstances surrounding Jonathan Bandabala's disappearance remain unclear, and his case remains unsolved. Despite the investigation, no significant leads have emerged. Jonathan Barmaki disappeared from his home in Buena Park, California, on April 30, 2016. He reportedly left his home at approximately 3 p.m. without informing his mother, with whom he lived. He took his 15-year-old dog, Sandy, with him. Investigators later discovered that Barmaki bought dog food and 2 pet bowls at a PetSmart store in Encinitas, California, which is about 75 miles south of Buena Park. Later that day, he was seen at a Target store in National City, California, at around 9 p.m., where he purchased a phone charger, toiletries, and clothes. His image was captured on surveillance video during the purchase. The next morning, at just before 5 a.m., another surveillance camera showed Barmaki buying gas at a Valero gas station in National City. However, he has not been heard from since that time. 18 hours later, Barmaki's 2013 Honda Civic was found abandoned by Border Patrol agents along Old Highway 80 near the Welcome sign to Jacumba Hot Springs, California, in a remote and desolate area not far from the Mexican border. The car had plenty of gas, was locked, and the windows were rolled up. Inside the vehicle were Barmaki's cellular phone, the dog food, and the 2 pet bowls he had bought, but his keys and wallet were missing. His dog, Sandy, was also found in the car, but the dog was dead, apparently from natural causes. The scene showed no signs of Barmaki's whereabouts, but there were footprints leading from the car, about 70 feet toward the border fence, which was 25 feet high. This raised further questions about what had happened to him, as it seemed to suggest he may have walked toward the border, but there was no sign of him beyond that point. At the time of his disappearance, Barmaki was working as a real estate agent. His mother has stated that he had no history of mental illness, seemed to be happy when he disappeared, and that he loved his dog Sandy, so it would have been out of character for him to leave the dog behind voluntarily. What brought him to Jacumba Hot Springs is still unclear, as he was unfamiliar with the area, and it seems unlikely that he would have gone there of his own volition. His disappearance is considered suspicious, and there are many unanswered questions about the events surrounding it. To this day, Jonathan Barmaki's case remains unsolved. Christina Bastion was last seen in Apple Valley, California, on November 1, 2015. That evening, she had planned to stay overnight at a female friend's house. However, she became upset and abruptly left her friend's home at 1:45 a.m., taking only her small tan and white Maltese poodle mixed dog, Coco, with her. Christina left behind many of her personal belongings, including her wallet, identification, and glasses, despite needing the glasses to see properly. Later that same night, the California Highway Patrol discovered some of Christina's belongings scattered along Highway 247, near Boddick Road in Johnson Valley, California. That morning, her recently purchased silver 2-door Dodge Ram 1500 pickup truck was found abandoned in Morongo Valley near Valley View Road and 29 Palms Highway. The truck, which Christina had owned for only a week, bore visible dents and scratches on both sides, suggesting it had been driven over rough desert terrain. On the day Christina disappeared, Coco was found wandering near the intersection of Bear Valley Road and Highway 18 by a local woman who took the dog home with her. The woman later posted a photo of Coco on a Lost and Found Pets page. A friend of Christina's mother saw the ad and contacted the woman, confirming Coco's identity. Since Christina's family was preoccupied with the search for her, they left the dog in the woman's care temporarily. On November 11th, 10 days after Christina vanished, a backpack containing some of her belongings was discovered on a dirt road near Bear Valley and Central Roads. However, a search of the surrounding area yielded no additional clues. Christina had stopped taking her prescribed medication for bipolar disorder several months before her disappearance, believing that God had healed her. Initially, she appeared to be doing well without the medication. She was a dedicated high school English teacher at Silverado High School, working with freshmen and sophomores. She was also pursuing a master's degree and saving to buy her own home. In the days leading up to her disappearance, however, Christina began exhibiting increasingly paranoid and erratic behavior. She told friends and family that someone had broken into her apartment on Laguna Road in Apple Valley. This event deeply unsettled her, and she became too afraid to remain in her apartment. She gathered some of her most valuable belongings and began staying with others. During this period, Christina removed the SIM card from her phone, then broke the device entirely. The day before she vanished, she made an unexpected 700-mile round trip from Apple Valley to Phoenix, Arizona, and back. She spoke to her brother-in-law during this time, expressing a desire to disappear and stating that she no longer wanted to be Christina Bastion. Christina had been struggling with significant debt from student loans and was considering taking a break from her job to reevaluate her life. Her family has speculated that she may have intentionally chosen to walk away from her life. However, due to her mental health challenges and the uncharacteristic nature of her disappearance, they are deeply concerned for her safety. Christina was known as a devout Christian and a creative writer with a love for crafting fictional stories. Despite extensive efforts to locate her, Christina's case remains unsolved, leaving her loved ones searching for answers and holding out hope for her return. Betty Ballas was last seen at her home on North Gardner Avenue in the Wilshire district of Los Angeles, California, on December 13, 1980. She disappeared together with her husband, Lewis, sometime between 6:15 and 9 p.m., and neither of them have ever been heard from again. When authorities checked the Ballas residence, they found the front door open, a set of keys still in the lock, the television set turned on, and the bathtub filled with water. There were no signs of a struggle inside the home, and the only items that seemed to be missing were the couple's car and the car keys. The following day, the Ballas' maroon four-door 1978 Cadillac was found in a vacant lot off Crenshaw Boulevard, near the Santa Monica Freeway and 7 miles from their home. The car showed no signs of bloodstains, which left investigators puzzled about the couple's whereabouts and safety. Their disappearance occurred just one day before Lewis was scheduled to testify against Larry Eugene Boyce, a man who had allegedly attacked Lewis in a bank parking garage on October 31, 1978. Boyce had robbed Lewis and threatened his life during that attack. At the time of Lewis and Betty's disappearance, Boyce was out on bail, facing trial for a range of charges, including kidnapping and robbing Lewis. Boyce had a violent past, having previously served 8 years in prison for murder. In December 1980, he was due to go on trial for a total of 14 felonies, with the kidnapping and robbery of Lewis among the charges. Though dozens of other witnesses were also scheduled to testify against Boyce, it was never conclusively proven that the Ballas couple's disappearance was related to the upcoming trial. Boyce was eventually convicted on several charges, including kidnapping Lewis, and was sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. However, the disappearances of Betty and Lewis remained unresolved. Foul play is strongly suspected in their case. Investigators believe that up to 3 individuals, including a woman who may have been pregnant at the time, were involved in their disappearance. Despite ongoing investigations, the cases remain unsolved, and no one has ever been arrested or charged in connection with the Ballas couple's disappearance. The mystery surrounding their vanishing continues to baffle authorities. Nancy Branch was returning to Palo Alto, California, from a weekend trip to Santa Barbara, California, on December 6, 1992, along with 3 other people: her fiancé, 31-year-old Kevin Clark, and a married couple, 29-year-old Alan Stewart and 31-year-old Amy Haxton Stewart. The group departed from Santa Barbara Airport on the morning of December 6th, and they had planned to return to Palo Alto by noon, so one couple could go buy a Christmas tree. They were traveling in a single-engine Piper Archer airplane at the time. The last communication from the aircraft occurred about 8 minutes after takeoff. At the time of the flight, weather conditions were described as treacherous, but the pilot did not indicate anything was wrong on board the aircraft. The plane never made it to Palo Alto, and it, along with its occupants, has never been seen again. An extensive search was conducted in the area, but no clues were found as to where the plane had gone. Investigators received a tip suggesting the plane had crashed somewhere near the Big Basin area of California, but no evidence was discovered to support this. Despite being believed to be deceased, Branch and her companions remain classified as missing since their remains were never found. Branch and Clark had shared a love for scuba diving, travel, and racquetball. The two had met while working together at Advanced Micro Devices in Sunnyvale, California. Branch, who had graduated from Stanford University in 1984 with a degree in psychology, was also well-educated. Both Clark and Alan Stewart were natives of the United Kingdom. Alan and Amy had been married just 6 weeks before their disappearance. Amy had a bachelor's degree in English from Stanford and a master's degree in business administration from the University of California, Los Angeles. The couple had planned to honeymoon in South Africa in January 1993. The case remains under investigation by the Menlo Park, California police. Despite the extensive search efforts, the bodies of Nancy Branch, Kevin Clark, Alan Stewart, and Amy Haxton Stewart have never been found. The disappearance of Bailey Blond on September 22, 2023, in Blue Lake, California, raises serious concerns of foul play. That day, she traveled to the property of her ex-boyfriend, Tyler Thomas Burrow, on Berg Road off State Route 299 to retrieve her belongings. At 4:38 p.m., Bailey texted a friend, indicating she needed help because Burrow was intoxicated and had threatened her with a gun. This was the last communication anyone received from her, and she has not been seen or heard from since. Later that evening, between 6 o'clock and 8 p.m., Burrow appeared with Bailey's dog, Hank, a black and white Australian cattle dog mix with distinctive heterochromatic eyes, one blue and one brown. He was driving Bailey's truck, a green 1997 Dodge Ram extended cab pickup with a white hood, broken windows, and the California license plate AT73126. Burrow parked the truck at a friend's house for approximately 36 hours before driving off again with Hank inside. On September 24th, at 4:42 a.m., an automatic license plate reader recorded Bailey's truck in Redding, California. Hours later, at 11:05 a.m., it was spotted in Medford, Oregon. Weeks after the initial disappearance, Burrow was seen in Trail, Oregon, still driving the truck, which he had spray-painted black. The case took a significant turn on November 14th, when Burrow was located at a remote forest camp in Jackson County, Oregon, and arrested on an unrelated outstanding warrant for aggravated assault. He was still in possession of both Bailey's truck and Hank. However, Bailey was not with him, and Burrow offered no information about her whereabouts. Bailey's disappearance is highly uncharacteristic, as she was known to maintain regular contact with her family. The circumstances surrounding her last known communication, Burrow's erratic movements, and his possession of her belongings strongly suggest foul play. Despite extensive searches and investigative efforts, Bailey's case remains unsolved. Dorothy Bolton was last seen at her home on Greenwood Ridge Road, 8.5 miles east of Elk, California, on January 1, 1983. She lived with her husband in a trailer in a rural area surrounded by dense woods and steep terrain. Her husband stated that he was watching a football game between 1 o'clock and 2 p.m. on that day, and during this time, he mentioned to Dorothy that he was going to buy a new license for their trailer. Dorothy asked how much it would cost, and when her husband told her the price was $33.60, she was shocked. The couple was retired and living on fixed incomes, which made the cost seem high. Her husband recalled that after hearing the price, Dorothy simply walked out the door. She did not take her coat, purse, or any money with her, and she didn't have a car. Dorothy has never been heard from again. Her husband reported her missing at 6 p.m. that same day. According to Dorothy's loved ones, she had been feeling despondent due to the couple's financial difficulties, the lingering effects of 2 serious car accidents she had been involved in over the past 2 years, and the isolation that came with living in such a remote area. Dorothy and her husband had moved from Los Angeles to rural California 4 years earlier, after her husband retired. Her husband stated that Dorothy had no history of leaving home without warning, that she wasn't taking any medication, and that she rarely drank alcohol. He didn't think she would have taken her own life or run away. Before her disappearance, Dorothy had often walked along the paths near their home in search of wildflowers and plants. She had a strong interest in nature and pottery. She made bowls with weeds imprinted in the sides and sold ceramic beads at the senior center. An extensive search was conducted in the area, but no sign of Dorothy was found. Her case remains unsolved. The mysterious case of Heather Bloom began on October 1, 2005, in Berkeley, California. The day was marked by a domestic dispute when police were called to an apartment at Carlton and California Streets to mediate an argument between Heather's mother, Phyllis, and her sister, Sherry. Heather was present during the altercation, having accompanied her mother on a visit from their home in Brooklyn, New York, to Sherry's residence in Berkeley. Once the argument was resolved, the police left the scene. When Phyllis eventually returned to New York, she left Heather in Sherry's care, trusting that her daughter would be safe with her sister. Heather and Sherry then moved into an apartment in the 1600 block of Parker Street. This marked the last time either the police or Phyllis saw Heather. Years passed without any communication from Heather or Sherry, which raised red flags for Phyllis. By June 2009, unable to reach either of them, Phyllis reported her daughter missing to the authorities and requested a welfare check for Heather. Investigators discovered that Sherry had moved out of the Parker Street apartment in 2007. Tracking her down proved challenging, and it took months before law enforcement located her. In March 2010, they found Sherry at a new apartment, but she refused to cooperate. She wouldn't open the door to the police, only answering their questions through a window. Sherry assured them that Heather was fine, but declined to allow anyone inside to see her sister. Suspiciously, neighbors at this location claimed they had never seen Heather. Within a month of the police visit, Sherry moved again, making it difficult for authorities to maintain contact. Her landlord revealed that Sherry's eviction was due to unpaid rent amounting to between $13,000 and $14,000. The trail grew colder as years passed. By approximately 2016, authorities discovered that Sherry had left the United States, relocating to Norway on a student visa. Despite numerous attempts by Berkeley's local media to reach out to her via email and phone, Sherry remained unresponsive. Investigators have been unable to confirm Heather's whereabouts or well-being. No records or sightings of Heather have surfaced, and efforts to trace her have yielded no results. The police remain uncertain about Heather's fate. There is no conclusive evidence to suggest that she is deceased or in danger, yet her lack of contact and her sister's evasive behavior fuel ongoing concerns. Authorities consider it plausible that Sherry might have placed Heather in a care home or arranged for her to be with another caregiver in the San Francisco Bay Area. However, without direct confirmation of Heather's status and location, her case remains unsolved. Wesley Keith Billingsley, born on August 24, 1983, hailed from Sacramento, California. Though details are scarce, it's known that his mother still resides there. After completing high school, Wesley moved to San Diego to attend San Diego State University, where he majored in integrated marketing and communications, though his mother mentioned it might have been business administration and marketing. During his time at SDSU, Wesley joined the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. This particular fraternity at SDSU, as some reports suggest, had a controversial reputation. Numerous allegations, including 3 reported incidents of sexual assault and instances of probation, surfaced during his membership period. However, it's important to acknowledge that not all fraternity members are implicated in such issues, and Wesley's involvement with the fraternity doesn't necessarily reflect negatively on him personally. After graduating in 2016, Wesley returned to Sacramento to save money, intending to move back to San Diego, a city he considered home. By the time he returned to San Diego, he was reportedly couch surfing in the Pacific Beach area while searching for job opportunities. The term couch surfing remains ambiguous in Wesley's case. It could imply staying temporarily with friends or renting a couch in someone's living space, a situation not uncommon in the high-cost housing market of California. Wesley's entrepreneurial spirit shone through as he co-founded BM Entertainment, a company involved in music management, and On Deck, a lifestyle clothing brand. He appeared passionate about these ventures, often promoting them at events. The timeline of Wesley's disappearance is confusing and riddled with inconsistencies. According to some reports, he was last heard from on June 12, 2018, while other sources, including the National Missing Persons Database, cite June 7, 2018. Conflicting accounts further muddle the story. Some claim Wesley was supposed to meet friends for dinner on June 12, while others mention plans to help friends move the following day. These friends remain unidentified, and details about the specific events leading up to his disappearance are vague. Wesley's mother, Crystal, reported him missing after noticing his social media silence and lack of contact, behavior she described as uncharacteristic. Months later, Wesley's 2004 Ford Expedition was found abandoned in the South Bay area of San Diego, near the border with Tijuana, Mexico. Police stated that some of Wesley's belongings were inside the vehicle, but released no additional information. The exact location of the car, its condition, and whether it showed signs of foul play remain undisclosed. Desperate for answers, Wesley's mother even filed a missing persons report in Mexico with the help of a translator, but this avenue seemed to yield no results. Speculation about Wesley's disappearance includes several theories. One possibility is carjacking, though there's no concrete evidence to support this. Another theory stems from a claim made by an online user who alleged that Wesley had been couch surfing at her son's home. According to this account, Wesley fell out with the household due to unpaid rent and bringing questionable individuals into the residence, eventually leading to eviction proceedings. However, this information is unverified, and police have not commented on it. Another theory suggests that Wesley may have sought new couch surfing arrangements through Craigslist, potentially exposing himself to dangerous individuals. Pacific Beach, while a lively area known for its nightlife, also has a darker side, including reports of drug use and occasional violence. This backdrop has fueled speculation that Wesley might have encountered the wrong crowd. As of now, the circumstances surrounding Wesley's disappearance remain shrouded in mystery. His mother continues to advocate tirelessly for her son, often appearing in interviews to raise awareness about his case. Wesley was 24 years old when he vanished and would be 25 today. He is described as 5 feet 8 inches, 130 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. He has several tattoos, details of which can be found on his missing persons page. A $3,000 reward is being offered for information leading to his whereabouts. Anyone with information is urged to contact the San Diego Missing Persons Department at 619-531-2277, referencing case number 18500-457. Wesley's family and friends, especially his mother, are desperate for answers, and even the smallest lead could help bring closure to this heartbreaking case. Robert Bennett was last seen in Los Angeles, California, on February 16, 1983. At the time of his disappearance, he was employed as a supervisor at the Whittier Narrows sanitation plant. That morning, Bennett drove his work truck into a brushy area near the plant, accompanied by his co-worker, John Alcantara. At 10:30 a.m., he was last seen, and from that point onward, he was never heard from again. When Bennett failed to return home, his wife reported him missing that evening. In the subsequent investigation, large amounts of Bennett's blood were discovered in an overgrown area behind the sanitation plant, as well as in a dump truck. Tire tracks from both Bennett's work truck and the dump truck were found at the scene, raising suspicions about foul play. Following his disappearance, Alcantara, who had been the last person seen with Bennett, began spreading a narrative that Bennett had been involved with another woman and had likely run away with her. However, Bennett's loved ones strongly refuted this claim, emphasizing that he was content with his life and had no reason to leave it behind. Investigators found no evidence to support Alcantara's speculation. Over time, Alcantara's behavior and past actions came under scrutiny. A gardener working under Bennett at the sanitation plant, Alcantara had reportedly sought a promotion to the position of foreman, which Bennett denied him. Bennett had cited Alcantara's poor attitude and history of bullying as reasons for the negative performance review that hindered his promotion. Furthermore, co-workers described Alcantara as erratic and occasionally disturbing, recounting incidents where he exposed himself and acted inappropriately at work. One co-worker even reported that Alcantara had threatened him after they both applied for the foreman position. This threat was brought to Bennett's attention the day before his disappearance, and Bennett expressed his intent to confront Alcantara the following morning. However, these details were not shared with law enforcement until years later. Authorities later concluded that Alcantara had murdered Bennett, alleging that he shot him in the head and subsequently disposed of his body. Another co-worker, Mike Davis, who had since passed away, was believed to have assisted Alcantara by disposing of Bennett's remains in the Puente Hills landfill. Despite extensive searches of the landfill, Bennett's remains were never recovered. Alcantara had been a suspect since the early stages of the investigation, but the lack of concrete evidence delayed charges against him for over 2 decades. In 2004, a breakthrough came when a co-worker from 1983 came forward, stating that Alcantara had confessed to murdering Bennett. This testimony provided prosecutors with enough evidence to charge Alcantara. In 2006, Alcantara was formally charged with Bennett's murder. During his trial, his criminal history, which included convictions for theft, cocaine possession, and vandalism, was brought to light. He continued to assert his innocence, but in March 2008, a jury found him guilty of Bennett's murder. Alcantara was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Although justice was served through Alcantara's conviction, Bennett's remains have never been found. The circumstances of his disappearance and the blood evidence discovered at the scene leave no doubt that foul play was involved. Erica Brown was last seen at her home in Fairfield, California, on August 20th, 2023. She lived with her boyfriend, Mark Anthony Randall Jr., at the time. She was reported missing on August 25th, and by August 31st, authorities had issued a warrant for Randall's arrest, charging him with her murder. Despite the arrest warrant, Randall remained at large for another 2 weeks before being located in the Sacramento, California area on September 15th, where he was arrested. Authorities discovered 2 vehicles linked to Randall, both of which were reported stolen and contained incriminating evidence. One vehicle, a Chevrolet Malibu, was found abandoned and burned in Richmond, California. Bloodstains matching Brown's DNA were found on the door. The second vehicle, a black Mercedes, was found abandoned in Vallejo, California, with Randall's fingerprints found on it. In the trunk of the Mercedes, authorities found 3 gas cans that had been used but were empty. Randall's mistress, Jan Agacinski, was charged with being an accessory to murder after the fact. However, the case against her was dismissed on the condition that she testify against Randall. At trial, Agacinski stated that she had come over to Randall's home and found Brown lying nude in a bed, covered with a blanket. Brown's face was battered and bloodied, and her pulse was faint. Randall allegedly told Agacinski that there had been an argument, and he had hurt Brown. Agacinski left but returned early the next morning, only to find that Brown was dead. Agacinski testified that there was a blue tote inside Randall's Chevrolet Malibu, and she moved it to give him space to load Brown's body into it. A neighbor's security camera showed Agacinski moving the tote. The tote was eventually found in Rio Vista, California, and Randall's phone records indicated he had been in Rio Vista after Brown's disappearance. Randall's defense attorney attempted to argue that Brown had died from an accidental drug overdose, not from murder, and that Randall had panicked and tried to hide her body. Despite this defense, the jury convicted Randall of first-degree murder after only 5 hours of deliberation. Brown's remains have never been found, but foul play is strongly suspected due to the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the evidence found against Randall. Teresa Baxter was last seen in Huntington Beach, California, sometime in August 1977. Her disappearance came under troubling and mysterious circumstances. On the day she vanished, her 2 daughters had gone to the beach. When they returned, their father informed them that their mother had run away with another man. This explanation would be the only account of her disappearance, as Baxter was never seen or heard from again. According to her daughter, Marie Plata, who was 12 years old at the time, her parents' marriage was far from harmonious. Their relationship was marked by frequent arguments, and her father had a tendency toward angry and violent outbursts. At one point, Baxter had taken her children and left her husband in an effort to escape the turmoil. However, she eventually returned to the family home, a decision that would later haunt her children. Plata described her mother as a loving and devoted parent before her disappearance. Baxter was deeply involved in her daughters' lives, cooking meals, helping them with their homework, and participating in Girl Scouts activities. After her mother's sudden absence, Plata searched the house for clues and made a startling discovery. Her mother's purse and driver's license were hidden in the attic. The presence of these belongings at home cast further doubt on the story her father had told about Baxter leaving with another man. Plata, already unhappy in a home filled with tension and suspicion, eventually ran away herself. She was placed in foster care, where she grew up apart from her family. It wasn't until 1988, over a decade after her mother vanished, that plotter reported Baxter as missing. By then, her father had never filed a missing person report or shown any concern about his wife's whereabouts. The police were able to gather some records related to Baxter, including her social security number and fingerprints, but they found no trace of her anywhere in the country after the summer of 1977. Her trail went completely cold. Plata has long held the belief that her father was directly involved in her mother's disappearance, either as the perpetrator or by arranging for someone else to harm her. However, no evidence was ever found to support these suspicions, and Baxter's husband passed away without ever being charged or formally implicated in the case. Adding to the confusion surrounding the timeline, some agencies list Baxter's disappearance as occurring on June 1, 1977, but Plata's account places the event in August of that year. Regardless of the exact date, her case remains unsolved, and Baxter is classified as missing under suspicious circumstances. Bonnie Brasher's was last seen at her residence in Freedom, California, on September 16, 1963. She spoke to one of her daughters at 9:30 a.m., but when her children returned home from school that afternoon, she was not there. Bonnie's husband, 61-year-old Nathan Brasher's, told their children that evening that Bonnie had simply walked down the road and had not returned. At the time of her disappearance, Bonnie and Nathan had 9 children, 4 of whom were still living with them. Bonnie left behind all her belongings, including her reading glasses and all 3 of the family's cars, and has never been heard from again. The following day, Nathan also disappeared. He left behind $77 in cash and a note addressed to his children that read, "This is all I can give you. I won't need it, so don't look for me." Nathan didn't take any vehicle with him, and he left behind all his personal belongings, including his dentures. Authorities theorized that Nathan had murdered his wife and then died by suicide, and they launched an extensive search of the area. However, they couldn't find much evidence in the Brasher's home, and one of their children had washed all the family's clothes before the police could examine them. Nathan had a history of violent behavior. His children reported that he had previously threatened Bonnie, and in 1958 he had been arrested for murder after slitting an elderly neighbor's throat during an argument. However, the grand jury did not indict him, deciding that he had acted in self-defense. 3 weeks after his disappearance, Nathan returned home and was arrested on charges of deserting his 2 minor daughters. He was also questioned about Bonnie's disappearance, but claimed to have no knowledge of what had happened to her. He told investigators that after Bonnie went missing, he felt left without a home, so he had caught a freight train to Oregon and worked in the apple orchards before deciding to return home to check his mailbox. Nathan pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to the desertion charges. He had previously been committed to Agnews State Hospital, the state psychiatric hospital, but had later escaped. In December 1963, 3 months after Bonnie's disappearance, Nathan was recommitted, and the desertion charges against him were dismissed. Nathan continued to have run-ins with the law after his wife's disappearance. In 1980, 17 years later, he was charged with shooting a man at the Pacific Avenue Mall. The victim, a member of the Hare Krishna religion who had been selling popcorn at the mall with a fellow co-religionist, survived the shooting. Nathan claimed he had acted in self-defense, but the victim's friend stated that Nathan had approached them without provocation, pushed them, and then shot at them. The outcome of this case is unknown. Nathan died in a nursing home in 1982 at the age of 77. To this day, there has been no indication of Bonnie Brasher's whereabouts since 1963. Christa Bowman left her mother's home in Morongo Valley, California, on March 14, 2017, to visit her boyfriend, Christopher Starperfect. She was driving a silver Toyota Avalon, and a photo of the car is included in her case summary. Christa did meet with Perfect, but the details of where they went and what they were doing remain unclear. It's known that they were in Arizona at one point, and they may have also traveled through New Mexico or Wyoming. After leaving, Christa kept in touch with her family by phone. The last time she contacted them via Facebook was on April 15, 2017, a month after she left, but after that communication suddenly stopped. Her last known location was Fort Garland, Colorado. Christa's family is concerned for her safety, as it is uncharacteristic of her to stop contacting them, and they don't believe she would have abandoned her young daughter. Perfect, who is a convicted felon, was arrested in Wyoming in late May 2017, but he claimed to have no knowledge of Christa's whereabouts. In May 2018, Christa's car was found at Cruz Alta condominiums in Taos, New Mexico, following an anonymous tip to the police. The caller stated that the car had been in the lot for at least 6 months, and inside, police found some of Christa's clothing and personal belongings. Taos is located about a 12-hour drive east of Morongo Valley. Despite this discovery, Christa's disappearance remains unsolved, and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are still unclear. Nancy Bromet left her father's home in Sunrise, Florida, on November 12, 2015, with her boyfriend, Julio Jesus Cruz, a long-haul truck driver. They were traveling to Bakersfield, California, in an orange 18-wheeler truck with Florida license plate number F3171P. Bromet did not bring a cellular phone with her on the trip, and all communication with her family was done through Cruz's phone. The last time her family heard from her was on November 17th, when she called her father. During the conversation, she sounded distressed and mentioned that she wanted to go home. Bromet's father told Cruz to take her to an airport and offered to buy her a plane ticket home. During the call, her father reportedly heard Bromet ask Cruz, "Well, what do you think?" before the line went dead. When her father called back, Cruz answered the phone and said that Bromet was asleep. After that, there was no further contact with Bromet. Cruz later stated that they arrived in California on November 19th, and on November 20th, he dropped Bromet off at a shopping center in El Centro with $40 so she could shop while he completed deliveries. However, when he returned 2 hours later to pick her up, Bromet was gone. Her family reported her missing on November 22nd. Bromet's family noted that while she struggled with addiction, she had never gone more than a couple of days without contacting them. They also found it suspicious that she had not accessed her bank account since her disappearance, as she had disability payments automatically deposited there every month. Although Cruz claimed that he last saw Bromet in El Centro, her family is unsure whether she ever made it as far as California. California authorities are investigating her disappearance, which remains unsolved. Kadija Britain was last seen in Covelo, California, on February 7, 2018, while visiting a friend in the 23,000 block of Airport Road. That night, according to a witness, Britain's ex-boyfriend, Niji Tony Fallis IV, and his new girlfriend, Antonia Batista Dawson, arrived in a black Mercedes. Fallis was carrying a small Derringer pistol, and he went to the door of the house and demanded that Britain come outside to speak with him. A physical altercation followed, and Fallis chased Britain around the car, which was being driven by Bautista Dawson. Fallis hit Britain, shoved her into the car, and then Bautista Dawson sped away with all three inside. After that, Britain was never heard from again. Fallis's relationship with Britain had been tumultuous, with a history of abuse, and they had recently broken up. He also had a history of domestic violence charges related to other women. About 2 or 3 weeks before Britain disappeared, Fallis had attacked her with a hammer and attempted to abduct her in an incident that was disturbingly similar to the later kidnapping. Britain had filed a complaint against Fallis for this, and due to his prior criminal history, he could have gone to prison if convicted. However, hours before her disappearance, Britain went to the police and stated that she didn't want to pursue charges. Her family believes Fallis coerced her into this decision. The witness who saw Britain's February 7th kidnapping did not come forward until several days later, after Britain's family realized she was missing. 10 days after Britain was reported missing, Fallis was charged with assault, kidnapping, first-degree burglary, threats to commit a crime resulting in death or great bodily injury, attempted murder, and being a felon in possession of a firearm and ammunition in connection with Britain's disappearance. Fallis pleaded not guilty and refused to cooperate with the investigation into her disappearance. In June, however, authorities were forced to drop most of the charges due to a lack of evidence. Fallas's bail was reduced, and he was released not long after, though he still faced charges related to possessing a firearm and ammunition. In August 2018, Bautista Dawson was arrested on suspicion of felony harboring or concealing a wanted felon, Fallas. Then, in October 2018, Fallas pleaded no contest to being a felon in possession of a firearm, and Bautista Dawson pleaded no contest to being an accessory to a felony. Fallas was sentenced to 4 years in prison, while Bautista Dawson received 18 months in jail, plus 18 months of supervision. She was also ordered to have no contact with Fallas and to spend 6 months in an inpatient drug rehabilitation program. Both the police and Britain's family believe she was murdered, with Fallas remaining the prime suspect in her case. Authorities continue to hope that Britain's body will be found, as her remains have never been recovered. Mary Boston was last seen in Sacramento, California, on September 1, 1968, and has never been heard from again. Her brother reported her missing, expressing concern that her disappearance was highly uncharacteristic. He described Mary as a devoted mother to her 3 children, and he couldn't believe she would have abandoned them. At the time of her disappearance, Mary was married to Silas Dwayne Boston. Her brother observed that Silas seemed nervous and jittery after Mary went missing, and surprisingly, Silas did not report her disappearance. He also stated that Silas claimed he didn't want to get involved. Furthermore, Mary's brother noticed that a .22 caliber rifle, one of Silas's prized possessions, was missing. Silas explained that he had traded the rifle for items he wanted, but this raised suspicion. In December 2016, at the age of 75, Silas was charged in connection with a double homicide committed at sea in 1978. While federal agents were investigating him as a potential suspect in Mary's disappearance, one of Silas's sons came forward with alarming information. The son revealed that, when he was 13, he had witnessed his father murder 2 British tourists, Dr. Christopher Farmer and his girlfriend Peta Frampton, and throw their bodies overboard in the Caribbean Sea. The bodies of the 2 tourists were discovered in the Caribbean off the coast of Guatemala on July 8, 1978. Silas allegedly bragged about murdering Mary, claiming he shot her to death and buried her body in an undisclosed location. According to his accounts, he shot Mary twice as she begged for her life, then buried her near a remote creek in Northern California. Silas also told the same traveling companion that he had killed 2 tourists in Belize and 3 drug dealers in Sacramento. He even suggested he may have been involved in a hit-and-run homicide in Sacramento in 1972. Despite these confessions, Silas never faced trial for the murders of Farmer and Frampton, nor for any other potential crimes. He died of natural causes in April 2017. Given the suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance and Silas's violent history, foul play is suspected in Mary's case. William Bunton left his home in Ramona, California, on March 22, 2010, telling his wife that he was going out to get bottled water. At noon, he used his debit card to purchase a pre-mixed alcoholic beverage in Ramona. Around 1 p.m., a worker in San Diego saw Bunton in the upper parking lot at Lake Sunderland, near the Sunderland Dam. He appeared upset and was crying, telling the employee that his mother had died and that he wished it had been him instead. The worker informed him that the lake was closed to the public and that he would need to leave. Bunton turned his car around, but has never been heard from again. His wife reported him missing the following day. Although Bunton claimed his mother had passed away, she was actually alive and living in Apple Valley, California. It is unclear why he said this, but prior to his disappearance, he had been experiencing severe emotional problems and may have been confused. On March 27th, Bunton's car, a silver and black 2009 Kia with handicapped California license plates, was found in a remote area 2 miles southeast of the Lake Sunderland boat launch. An extensive search of the area was conducted. Authorities discovered his eyeglasses, socks, and the bottle of alcohol he had purchased, though there was only a small amount left in it. Investigators theorized that Bunton may have experienced a medical crisis due to drinking alcohol and being without his insulin shots and other medications. However, the search yielded no trace of him or his body, and he left all his belongings behind. His case remains unsolved. Teresa Beer was born on April 16, 1971, in Fresno, California. From the very start, her life was overshadowed by hardship and instability. Her parents, Shirley and David Beer, had a turbulent relationship, and their household was far from a nurturing or safe environment for young Teresa and her siblings. David Beer, a Vietnam War veteran, struggled to adjust to civilian life, and his return from the war left him deeply scarred, both physically and emotionally. His struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder made it difficult for him to hold down steady employment or maintain a peaceful household. Shirley, Teresa's mother, had her own battles with mental health. She suffered from severe mental illness, which not only impacted her ability to care for her children, but also created an atmosphere of unpredictability and chaos in the home. Together, David and Shirley's unresolved issues created a volatile environment, one where the children were often caught in the crossfire of their dysfunction. When Teresa was just 3 years old, a traumatic incident brought the dire state of her home life to the attention of authorities. Teresa was admitted to the hospital with multiple severe injuries, including broken bones. The nature of her injuries raised immediate suspicion among doctors, who quickly realized that her wounds were not accidental. These injuries, alongside other signs of neglect, led to an investigation that revealed Teresa and her siblings were victims of abuse. The revelations were grim. Teresa had been physically abused, and the environment in which she and her siblings lived was deemed unsafe. Social services intervened, removing Teresa and her siblings from their parents' custody. Teresa, along with her siblings, was placed in foster care. The foster family chosen for them was not entirely unfamiliar. They were members of the same church as Teresa's biological family. While the change in environment offered the children a measure of physical safety, the emotional scars from their early years of abuse and neglect were not easily healed. Adjusting to life in foster care was a challenge for Teresa, and although the new environment was meant to be a refuge, it could never entirely erase the trauma of her early years. During this time, Teresa's father, David, sought to regain custody of his children. He had separated from Shirley and believed that reuniting his family under his care would be the first step toward rebuilding their lives. After a legal battle, David succeeded in regaining custody of Teresa and her siblings. However, the reunion did not bring the stability or security he had hoped for. David remarried, bringing a stepmother into Teresa's life. This new family dynamic came with its own set of challenges. David's mental health struggles persisted, and the financial strain on the family was immense. These difficulties created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty, further exacerbating the challenges Teresa faced in her formative years. Seeking a fresh start, the family relocated to Southern California. However, the move did little to alleviate the family's struggles. David's erratic behavior, compounded by his unresolved trauma, made it difficult for him to provide a consistent and supportive home life. The new environment, while geographically distant from the scenes of Teresa's earliest traumas, could not shield her from the emotional and psychological turmoil that followed her wherever she went. Eventually, the family decided that Teresa would live with her great-grandmother in Fresno. This move was intended to offer Teresa a more stable and nurturing environment, but it was not a permanent solution. After some time, custody of Teresa was granted to her uncle, John Richmond, who was widely known by his nickname, Blind Johnny. Blind Johnny was a figure of local notoriety. A 42-year-old man who had lost his sight under dubious circumstances, rumored to have been a self-inflicted gunshot wound during a game of Russian roulette. Johnny was far from an ideal guardian. He lived with his 17-year-old girlfriend, Tamara, and his own children. Johnny's home was a place of dysfunction and exploitation. Teresa's role in Johnny's household was less that of a family member and more that of a servant. She was often pulled out of school to care for Johnny's children, cook and clean. These responsibilities hindered her education and further isolated her from her peers. Teresa was labeled slow by her teachers, a label that reflected not a lack of intelligence, but the cumulative effect of years of trauma, neglect, and interrupted schooling. Life under Johnny's roof was not only labor-intensive, but also abusive. There were allegations that Johnny sexually abused Teresa and allowed others to exploit her as well. These allegations paint a horrifying picture of a young girl trapped in an environment where she was repeatedly victimized, with little hope of escape. Teresa's withdrawn nature and the challenges she faced in school mirrored the deep pain and isolation she felt. Despite all the hardships, Teresa maintained a love for the outdoors and a fascination with Bigfoot lore. These interests offered her a rare sense of joy and escape from her bleak reality. By the mid-1980s, Teresa and Beer's life was marked by a tragic combination of instability, abuse, and neglect. Living under the custody of her uncle, Blind Johnny Richmond, Teresa endured a difficult existence. She found herself pulled between the demands of her chaotic home life and the lingering trauma of her past, with few avenues for support or escape. Despite her circumstances, Teresa nurtured an interest in the outdoors and developed a fascination with Bigfoot lore, a subject that seemed to offer her a world of wonder far removed from her grim reality. Her curiosity about the legendary creature was likely influenced by the environment she lived in, where stories of Bigfoot were part of local folklore. For Teresa, this fascination was more than just a passing interest. It became a way to escape the pain and monotony of her daily life. At the time, Teresa's uncle, Johnny, had a connection to a group of people who were also interested in Bigfoot. This connection led to her fateful encounter with 43-year-old Russell Welch, a family acquaintance who shared a strong belief in Bigfoot's existence. Welch was a self-proclaimed expert on the subject and a local eccentric known for his intense interest in tracking the elusive creature. Teresa, only 14 years old, became intrigued by Welch's knowledge and his tales of Bigfoot sightings. On June 1, 1987, Welch invited Teresa to accompany him on a camping trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Shaver Lake to search for evidence of Bigfoot. Welch presented the trip as an exciting opportunity to explore the wilderness and learn more about the legendary creature. For Teresa, the trip may have seemed like an adventure, a rare chance to leave behind the difficulties of her daily life, even if only for a short time. The two set out for the mountains, but the circumstances surrounding their departure were troubling. Teresa's uncle, Johnny, later claimed that Welch did not seek his permission to take Teresa on the trip. However, others suggested that Johnny willingly allowed Teresa to go with Welch, raising questions about his motivations and judgment. Regardless of the details, it was clear that Teresa, a vulnerable teenager, was being placed in a precarious situation. According to Welch, the camping trip began uneventfully. He claimed that he and Teresa spent time hiking and searching for signs of Bigfoot. However, on the evening of June 2nd, Welch alleged that Teresa wandered off into the woods and never returned. He stated that he searched for her throughout the night and the following day before returning to town to report her disappearance. When Welch reported Teresa missing, his account raised immediate suspicion. Law enforcement launched a search and rescue operation in the rugged terrain around Shaver Lake, but the effort yielded no trace of Teresa. As days turned into weeks, hope of finding her alive dwindled. The investigation into Teresa's disappearance quickly focused on Welch. His behavior during and after the trip, as well as inconsistencies in his story, fueled suspicions. Welch claimed that Teresa had left the campsite of her own accord and that he had no knowledge of what happened to her after she disappeared into the woods. However, investigators found several aspects of his account difficult to believe. Adding to the complexity of the case were the troubling circumstances of Teresa's life prior to her disappearance. Her family history, the allegations of abuse she endured, and her uncle's questionable role in allowing her to go on the trip created a tangled web of unanswered questions. Some speculated that Welch might have been involved in foul play, while others suggested that Teresa, seeking to escape her difficult life, may have run away intentionally. Despite extensive searches and investigations, Teresa Beer was never found. Her case remains unsolved. "41-year-old Dottie Kaylor and her husband, Jewel, lived in Concord, California, a quiet suburb just east of Oakland. Their life together was a mix of complexities, much of it rooted in Dottie's severe struggle with agoraphobia, a disorder that kept her largely confined to their home. On June 12, 1985, Jewel drove her to the Bay Area Rapid Transit Station in Pleasant Hill, just 3 miles from their home in Concord. The BART system, as it's known locally, connects San Francisco to the cities of the East Bay. While to most people, buying a ticket and riding the train is a mundane task, for Dottie, it was a significant challenge, a test of courage. She was terrified of leaving the safety of her home, of being in public spaces, and the possibility of facing a panic attack in an unfamiliar place loomed over her. It's not clear whether she managed to overcome her fears that day and actually boarded the train, but what is certain is that after this moment, she vanished without a trace. In the days that followed, Dottie's family and friends were confused and concerned. Jewel initially thought she might have left him to make a point or to make life difficult for him, an idea that didn't sit well with Dottie's sister, Diane Rusnak. Diane suspected that Dottie might have left in the early stages of her disappearance to get back at Jewel for his prolonged absences and infidelities, which had weighed heavily on their marriage. However, Diane couldn't fathom that Dottie would stay away for any extended period of time. As the weeks, months, and years passed without a word from Dottie, her family and friends were left grappling with the unsettling question: could she have disappeared voluntarily, or had something far more sinister occurred? Dottie was originally from Chardon, Ohio, a quiet woman who loved to read and write. After high school, she moved to Berkeley, California, in 1964 to be closer to her sister Diane, and began working as a secretary. It was in Berkeley that she first met Jewel, who was 33 at the time, while he was dating her roommate. Jewel initially introduced himself under the name Jim Rupp and didn't immediately disclose that he was married with a young daughter. It wasn't long before Dottie discovered Jewel's true identity, and upon confronting him, he promised that he and his wife were planning to divorce. Dottie, still in love, chose to forgive him, and they soon began living together. Eventually, after much persuasion on Dottie's part, Jewel filed for divorce, and the two married in April of 1975. Jewel worked as an entomologist and aerial photography specialist with the United States Forest Service, and their marriage began in a home on Greer Avenue in Concord. However, over time, Dottie's agoraphobia, anxiety, and insecurities kept her inside, creating a self-imposed prison. Jewel's frequent absences, often due to his work, exacerbated the situation, and Dottie's mental health suffered as a result. She couldn't even hold down a job, and the isolation only deepened. Jewel's long absences left Dottie alone for long stretches, and she became more withdrawn, with no friends in the area to rely on. Her anxiety spiraled as a result of the lack of contact with Jewel and the absence of any support system. The cracks in their marriage began to widen as Dottie's suspicions about Jewel grew. She noticed signs of infidelity and became increasingly vigilant, tracking his phone calls, motel receipts, and dinner meetings. Dottie eventually confronted the women Jewel was seeing, many of whom were unaware he was married. The confrontations led to loud, bitter arguments, often overheard by neighbors, but Dottie always forgave him, struggling to hold on to the relationship despite the betrayals. Diane believed that Dottie stayed with Jewel because, despite everything, she preferred the stability of her marriage to the uncertainty of being alone. Then came Thanksgiving Day, 1981, when their relationship reached a violent breaking point. Dottie confided in her friend, Paula Powers, about an argument that turned physical after Jewel accused her of hiding a checkbook. The argument escalated, and Jewel became violent, throwing things and hitting Dottie with a typing stand, causing a head wound. Dottie, frightened, grabbed a pair of scissors and told Jewel to stay away from her. The altercation was loud enough for neighbors to call the police, and by the time officers arrived, Dottie had driven herself to the hospital for stitches and then spent the night at a battered women's shelter. Jewel, however, painted a different picture of the incident. He claimed that Dottie started the fight by threatening him with scissors. The police investigated, but neither party pressed charges, and the case was dropped. This was only one of many such incidents. Dottie had written letters to Jules' parents, accusing him of years of physical and emotional abuse. She recounted times when Jules had kicked her, thrown scalding coffee at her, and even made threats to kill her. In one letter, she revealed that Jules had once confessed to building a bomb and blowing up a neighbor's dog when he was younger. Dottie also claimed that he had considered killing his first wife over a divorce. Despite these revelations, Dottie never left him, perhaps because the fear of the unknown was greater than the fear of staying in an abusive relationship. Dottie's feelings of entrapment and fear were compounded by Jules' refusal to address the abuse, even after she confronted him about it. She began to plan her escape, joining a support group for women going through divorce or who had lost their husbands. She took classes on life after divorce and began to see a counselor to address her agoraphobia. Slowly, she began to rediscover herself. She started wearing brighter clothes, styled her hair differently, and grew more confident. Dottie also opened a post office box to receive mail secretly and applied for credit cards and a personal bank account, all without Jules' knowledge. She stashed away $5,000 in a locked file cabinet along with documents that contained proof of Jules' affairs, his abuse, and his threats against her. Dottie even made arrangements for her friend Shelley to keep the documents safe in case something happened to her. In the spring of 1985, Dottie's life seemed to be on the verge of a major change. Jules informed her that he had accepted a job transfer to Salt Lake City, Utah. Dottie made it clear she had no intention of going with him. They argued over the division of their assets, and Dottie told Jules she wanted a divorce. She consulted a lawyer, attended divorce mediation sessions, and started preparing for the life she had been dreaming of for years. On June 5th, Dottie sent a birthday card to a friend, expressing relief that she was almost free from her marriage. But as June 12th arrived, Dottie seemed more tense than ever. Jules drove her to the BART station, where she was last seen. After that, she vanished without a trace. The following day, Jules discovered that Dottie's car was parked at the Concord BART station with her purse still inside. Her wallet, medications, and identification were in the purse, but her bee-sting kit was missing. Jules left several notes and letters on the car, asking her to contact him. He even moved the car to avoid a parking ticket. Dottie's friends and family, particularly Shelley, began to grow increasingly concerned as they couldn't reach her. Shelley was alarmed by the news that Dottie's purse had been left behind, knowing how important it was to her. Jules claimed to have reported Dottie missing, but when Shelley called the police, she discovered no such report had been filed. Something was clearly wrong. The disappearance of Dottie, with all its inconsistencies, strange behaviors, and possible evidence pointing to Jules, remains an unresolved case. Many people involved, including private investigators, Dottie's family, and even some neighbors, believe foul play was likely involved, particularly considering Jules' actions and statements before and after her disappearance. Despite the lengthy investigation and new evidence brought to light over the years, including the discovery of disturbing information about Jules' behavior and past relationships, the case remains unsolved, with no charges filed. Jules' behavior, his refusal to cooperate with police, his conflicting statements, and his cold attitude toward Dottie's disappearance only deepened suspicions about his involvement. Furthermore, his subsequent actions, including moving to Salt Lake City, remarrying, and his dismissive attitude toward Dottie's fate, raised even more red flags. Diane, Dottie's sister, became increasingly suspicious of Jules' behavior following her sister's disappearance. Diane discovered that Jules had repainted their house shortly before Dottie vanished, which seemed an odd decision in the context of Dottie's disappearance. Additionally, on Sunday, June 16th, the day before he reported Dottie missing, Jules called a real estate agent and asked her to list the house for rent. He claimed that he needed to rent the house because Dottie had not signed the loan papers before she vanished. Diane pressed Jules about what Dottie was going to do if she returned. He offered no answer. Diane and Shelley, another of Dottie's family members, took whatever belongings they could find from the truck that they recognized as belonging to Dottie, including her car. However, they felt that Jules had kept many of her things. They also noted that Jewel appeared more concerned about his financial situation than the disappearance of his wife. Jewel had claimed that he had to use his parents' house as collateral to secure a loan for a new house, since Dottie had not signed the loan papers. 2 weeks after Dottie's disappearance, on June 24th, he moved to Salt Lake City, where he still lives and works. Shortly after his move, Jewel and Diane spoke on the phone, and Diane recorded the conversation. In this conversation, Jewel suggested that Dottie either disappeared on her own, would return to disrupt his life, or was dead. He also claimed that Dottie had taken over $30,000 from him. Diane was disturbed by his nonchalant attitude toward her sister's possible death. The police questioned Dottie's friends, relatives, neighbors, and men she had met through a Christian singles organization. They also searched the house that she and Jewel had shared. However, no evidence of a struggle or a recent cleanup inside the house was found. In January 1986, Diane hired private investigators, Francie Kaylor and Randy Ontiveros, to look into Dottie's disappearance. Kaylor believed foul play was involved, as Dottie had left behind all her belongings, including her clothes and dog. Her bee sting kit was missing, though the instructions remained in her purse, suggesting that Dottie might have intended to take the kit, but never did. Furthermore, Dottie had not accessed her bank account or cashed the $5,000 check she left with Shelley. There was no activity on her accounts after her disappearance. Dottie's friends and family found it highly unlikely that she would voluntarily walk away from her life. Shelley, in particular, believed that Dottie would have stayed with her if she wanted to get away from Jewel. None of Dottie's friends ever heard her talk about disappearing, let alone for a long time. As their attempts to find Dottie turned up no leads, Diane and Kaylor became more and more concerned that Dottie might be dead. They began to view Jewel as a suspect. His story about Dottie going to the BART station was inconsistent. He was the only one who reported seeing her there, and nobody else could confirm her presence. In fact, Jewel was the only one who claimed to have seen her at all on June 12th. Jewel's behavior following Dottie's disappearance raised more suspicions. He took several sick days from work, claiming he needed time to pack. When the police questioned him, he said he had worked a full day on June 12th. However, his time card showed he had only worked for an hour and a half before taking the rest of the day off. He did not mention that he had taken June 11th off. It seemed improbable that Dottie could have found a spot to park next to Jewel's car at the crowded Concord BART station, a station known to be busy during the workweek. Furthermore, Jewel never reached out to Dottie's family or friends to see if they knew where she was. He claimed he had called Diane on June 17th to tell her that Dottie was missing, but Diane disputed that claim and said that she learned about Dottie's disappearance from Paula Powers. Jewel had also told the police that Dottie was supposed to return on June 24th, but he reported her missing on June 17th, telling others that she had left him. The police asked Jewel multiple times to take a polygraph, but he refused every time. At one point, he sent a lengthy letter to the detectives explaining why he would not take the polygraph. When Kaylor and Ontiveros questioned Jewel, his story about the day Dottie disappeared changed. He initially said he helped her wash her car around 3 p.m. and then took her to the BART station. When confronted with these inconsistencies, Jewel switched back to his original statement, claiming that he must have helped her wash her car the day before. Detective Donald Make of the Concord Police Department said that if this case turned out to be anything other than a straightforward disappearance, Jewel would be considered a suspect, along with anyone else who was close to Dottie at the time. Jewel claimed that he was unconcerned about being considered a possible suspect, instead suggesting that Dottie either disappeared on purpose or had been involved with the wrong person from the start. As time passed and no new evidence emerged, Diane and Kaylor began to worry that Dottie might be dead. The lack of closure left them with no peace, but they vowed not to forget her. Jewel, meanwhile, said it had been hell living with Dottie and dealing with her disappearance. However, after moving to Salt Lake City, settling into a new job, and leaving that whole problem behind, he said things were now really pretty good. Jewel became the primary suspect in Dottie's disappearance. He was the last person to see her alive, and nobody else could verify if she had ever made it to the BART station. He had a history of cheating on Dottie and had been physically abusive toward her. Dottie had documented his affairs, abuse, and threats, and they had been planning to divorce. She was supposed to stay in the house when Jewel moved, a plan Jewel did not seem pleased with. In the days following Dottie's disappearance, Jewel took several sick days, even though he claimed to be working a full day. His behavior indicated that he was more concerned with his financial situation than with Dottie's welfare. He packed her belongings and rented out their house, even though she was supposed to stay there when she returned. Dottie had gone on a few dates before her disappearance, but she had told Diane in December 1984 that she was not going to date anyone until after her divorce. Although the men Dottie dated were questioned, they were not considered suspects. Dottie's case became a mystery that captured public attention when it aired on Unsolved Mysteries in 1987. Following the broadcast, police received several tips, but none of them led to credible sightings of Dottie. A viewer contacted the police after recognizing Jewel as a man who had been engaged to her friend, Della Vigil. After interviewing Della, detectives discovered more about Jewel's behavior during his relationship with her. He had been married to Dottie when he proposed to Della and continued writing love letters to her, even as he planned his move to Salt Lake City. Jewel's relationship with Della became increasingly concerning, especially as he made several disturbing comments about Dottie's disappearance, including cold statements about her possibly being dead and that he would not care if she were. He even bragged about his knowledge of body disposal, which horrified Della and led her to cut ties with him. In January 1988, police received an anonymous letter postmarked from Gary, Indiana, accusing Jewel of killing Dottie. The letter claimed Jewel had beaten Dottie to death with a tire iron and buried her body under a birch tree near a new housing development in Concord. Though DNA analysis showed that the saliva on the envelope was male, no match could be made. A document examiner believed the handwriting was similar to Jewel's, but there was no definitive confirmation. The police speculated that the letter could have come from a psychic, a witness, or even the killer. Months after Dottie's disappearance, Jewel continued his strange behavior. A Salt Lake City insurance agent described how Jewel showed no remorse about Dottie's disappearance when he asked to remove her from his insurance policy. The agent also noted his obsession with Della and his frequent visits to her office. In addition, a motel clerk recalled how Jewel had harassed her in the past, writing romantic letters and becoming obsessed with her despite her being in a relationship with someone else. By 2001, Jewel had become more evasive. In an interview, he claimed to have forgotten about Dottie's disappearance and continued to provide conflicting statements. He maintained that Dottie had simply disappeared of her own accord. Detective Messick continued to investigate, and in 2004, after a new series of articles were published, the case was reopened. Evidence suggested that Jewel had a significant financial motive to dispose of Dottie. Investigators found new clues, including the fact that Jewel had rented out their house several days before Dottie vanished, which contradicted his claim that he had been forced to rent it due to her disappearance. Despite the investigation, no charges have been filed. However, Jewel remained a person of interest. Even with the unsettling evidence and numerous inconsistencies in his statements, the case of Dottie's disappearance remains unsolved. Detectives have continued their efforts, and though they have yet to locate Dottie or recover her body, the investigation into Jewel's role in her disappearance continues. In the summer of 1990, Justin Burgwinkle of Massachusetts enlisted in the U.S. Army, eager to become part of its elite Ranger unit. He began rigorous language training and preparation, but his ambitions were abruptly cut short when he was arrested for shoplifting. As a result, Justin was removed from the Ranger program and reassigned to Fort Ord, located near Monterey, California, where he served as a cook for the soldiers stationed there. In August 1992, Justin met Iolando Antunes, a computer science student from Santa Clara, California, and they began dating. The distance between them was considerable, about 85 miles, but Justin made an effort to visit her as often as possible. However, over time, Iolanda noticed some odd behavior from Justin. During his visits, he would often act strangely, suddenly claiming he had to leave and return to Fort Ord. He told Iolanda that it would be better if she didn't know what he was involved in, which only made her more suspicious. In February 1993, Justin was transferred to Fort Lewis in Washington state. Even though the distance between them grew, he still managed to return to Santa Clara in May 1993 to visit Iolanda. However, his behavior seemed even stranger than before. Justin became incredibly secretive about a briefcase he brought with him, and Iolanda once saw him taking papers out of it and shredding them. On another occasion, she found him crying in the living room, but when she asked him what was wrong, he refused to speak about it. Then, one night, while Justin was out with friends, Iolanda received a strange phone call. The caller asked her to relay a message to Justin. The mission's off. When Justin returned and she gave him the message, he became visibly agitated and refused to explain what it meant. A few days later, Justin left for Fort Lewis again. However, before he left, he contacted his parents. They noticed nothing unusual in his demeanor, but he had recently purchased 2 handguns and a large amount of ammunition for no apparent reason. On June 4, 1993, at 4:30 a.m., Justin failed to report for his kitchen duties at Fort Lewis. 3 days later, he was officially reported as AWOL. But instead of vanishing completely, Justin showed up at Iolanda's apartment that night. He called his parents, telling them that he wasn't AWOL and was simply working. Later that night, he called Fort Lewis to tell them that he had things to take care of but would report back as soon as possible. Justin, however, did not report back. Instead, he stayed with Iolanda for a few more days. He refused to explain his situation, but told her to watch the movie White Sands, which he said would make everything clear. The film revolves around arms smuggling, the FBI, and the CIA, and Iolanda began to wonder if Justin was somehow connected to the CIA. However, Justin refused to elaborate further. On June 12, 1993, at around 10 a.m., Justin left Iolanda's apartment for the last time. He claimed he was heading to Fort Ord, but was never seen again. His parents contacted both the police and the Army, urging them to search for Justin, but they were met with little response. 3 months later, Justin's car was found abandoned at a beachfront motel near Monterey, California. Strangely, there was no record of him staying at the motel during the time his car was parked there. His handguns were not in the trunk, but his briefcase, wallet, car keys, credit cards, and military ID were found inside, along with his military dog tags. This discovery reminded Iolanda of a bizarre conversation she had had with Justin before his disappearance. He had once asked her if she knew what military dog tags were for. When she said she didn't, he explained that dog tags were used to identify soldiers, and that if she ever saw them lying around, it meant he was dead. In the wake of Justin's disappearance, rumors began circulating that his vanishing might have been connected to Army intelligence, and some speculated that he might have been murdered. Others, however, believed that Justin fabricated a strange story to explain his disappearance, and that he might have voluntarily left the military to disappear on his own. His case remains unsolved, with no clear answers as to whether he was murdered or whether he ran away to start a new life. Despite the uncertainty, Justin's family has continued to search for answers, but they have had little to go on. Justin's mother, Diane, who was featured in the case's coverage, passed away in 2006. In her obituary, Justin was listed as having predeceased her, a poignant reminder of the unresolved mystery surrounding his disappearance. The case remains open, and the search for answers continues.